Morning, everyone. Today we're continuing in our sermon series, our new sermon series called The Glory and the Horror. And we're going through the book of Joshua as we do this, and we're unpacking both the beauty and the amazing works of God found within it. And we're also addressing some of the more difficult passages and topics that this book covers as well. And today we're going to be looking at chapter 2. And here the people of Israel, they're getting ready to go into the land of Canaan, the land that God had promised them generations ago. And they're right on the edge of going into this land, but first they have to make preparations. And in chapter 1, we see God commissions Joshua. He reminds him that just as he was with Moses, his predecessor, so too is he going to be with Joshua. And he tells him to be strong and courageous. And as he's going into it, he's going to lead the people as they inherit the land, to be strong and courageous. And then we see Joshua talking to some of the leaders of the tribes. And he's telling them to go tell the people to get their provisions ready, because in a few days we're going to be going in, we're going to cross the river Jordan, and we're going to go and take the land. And as we arrive at chapter 2, we're told that Joshua is first sending 2 spies ahead to go and scout the land. And what's key about this is that almost 38 years prior to this, after God had rescued the people of Israel out of slavery from Egypt, God had actually given Israel the opportunity to step into the promised land then. And at this time, God said to Moses, send 12 spies to go and spy out the land in Canaan and bring back a report. And they were gone for about 40 days. They were traveling all over the land, gathering intel for this report. And when they returned, they told the people of the fruitfulness of the land. They said that it does indeed flow with milk and honey. And this was a reference from when God first spoke to Moses back at the burning bush. And he said, I'm going to rescue Israel and we'll send them into a land flowing with milk and honey. And this wasn't not literally milk and honey was just lying about in pools. It was symbolism to show how fertile that the land was going to be. And when these spies came back, they even carried a cluster of grapes that had to be carried by 2 people, just as further evidence of how fruitful this land was. But instead of seeing this and trusting in God, 10 of the spies that were sent, they came back full of fear. And they went on to speak of these strong and powerful giants that lived in the land. And they let this fear spread, and it made them give a bad report to the people, discouraging them, saying, there's no way that we could take the land, and we'll surely be killed by these giants, even if we try. But the other 2 spies that were with them, well, there was one named Caleb, and there was one named Joshua, and this is the same Joshua who is now the leader of Israel. They stood firm, and they pleaded with the people, and they were saying, yes, there are some strong people there. However, God has promised us this land. And he is faithful and he's on our side and he will bring us the victory. We don't need to be afraid. But alas, despite their best efforts, this didn't work. And we're told in Numbers 14 that fear swept across the people of Israel. They began weeping and crying out that they should have died in Egypt, that life was better for them back there, even in slavery. And they decided that maybe they should just choose a new leader and just make their way back to Egypt. So they rebelled against Moses, they rebelled against God. And it was because of this, because of their unbelief, that God kept the Israelites in the wilderness for another 38 years. This was until a new generation had risen up, one that wasn't holding on to the fear of the past or of the memories of Egypt, was a generation that was full of faith in God, that they've seen him provide daily for them in the wilderness and was ready to step into the promises that he had for them. The only 2 adults that actually survived and made it from those 38 years ago were Caleb and Joshua, the 2 who remained faithful to God throughout. And so now, after all of these years has passed, we now have 2 Israelite spies ready to enter the land of Canaan once again. So we're going to read that account of what happens to these spies. And if you've got your Bibles, then turn to Joshua 2. And we're going to read that. If not, it will come up on the screens for you. And he says, then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab. Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, "Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they'd come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them." But she had taken them and hidden them up on the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax she had laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan. And as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, "I know that the Lord has given this land to you, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites, east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts sank, and everyone's courage fell because of you. For the Lord your God is the God in heaven above and on earth below. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I've shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother and brothers and sisters and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death." "Our lives for your lives," the men assured her. If you don't tell what we're doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land." So she let them down by a rope through the window from the house she lived in, was part of the city wall. She said to them, "Go to the hills so that the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourselves there for 3 days until they return, and go on your way." Now the men had said to her, "This oath you made us swear will not be binding on us unless when we enter the land you have tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, unless you have brought your father and mother and your brothers and all your family into the house. If any of them go outside your house into the street, their blood will be on their own heads. We will not be responsible. As for those who are in the house with you, their bloods will be on our heads if a hand is laid on them. But if you tell what we're doing, we will be released from your oath, and you made us swear." "Agreed," she replied. "Let it be as you say." So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. When they left, they went into the hills and stayed there 3 days until the pursuers had searched all along the road and returned without finding them. Then the two men started back. They went down out of the hills, forded the river, and came to Joshua, son of Nun, and told him everything that had happened to them. They said to Joshua, "The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us." So these spies, they go and they enter into the land of Canaan. They go to the city of Jericho. There's a picture of a map. You can see they've come, it will come up. But they go from the land of Shittim, and they cross this river into the Jordan. And Shittim's on the blue one on the right, and they go into the land of Jericho. And as they get there, they go into the house of a prostitute. And as the story unfolds, we begin to realize that the heroes of this story isn't actually the two spies, as we might first believe. But it's in fact this woman named Rahab. So who is Rahab, and what do we know about her? This is a picture, an artist's rendition, according to the internet. All the stories say she's a very beautiful woman, and they all draw her like that. But we first know about her, the first thing we know is her name. And it might seem like such an obvious thing to say, but us knowing her name testifies to how important she is to this narrative. And I'm sure that the two spies that were sent out, I'm sure they did an excellent job, and that Joshua was very proud of them. But clearly the writer of this book wants to draw our attention to something else in this story, as they don't even tell us the name of these two spies. And this doesn't discount what the role that they played, and because this is a key moment for Israel. They're finally about to step into the land that has been talked about in stories for generations. So the information that they're bringing back is vital. But yet it's Rahab who is named here. There's something going on with this woman that should grab our attention, to make us pay attention to who she is and what we can learn from her. And as we read on, we're told that Rahab was a prostitute whose house was in the city wall. Now, we're not told why the spies ended up in Rahab's house. It could have been because there would be naughty little boys, as some speculate. But it also could be very commonplace to see people going in and out of our house from the city and from travelers from outside the city, given the nature of her work and the prime location of her house. So it could almost act as this perfect cover for these spies as they're going in to almost hide in plain sight. But regardless of the reason, it's clear that this meeting was meant to be. Rahab, as well as many others in the city, they've heard of the Israelites. They've heard of their God and all that's transpired since their departure from Egypt. Now, for the spies going into Jericho, they're going in with this history that has been passed down to them. A history of the God of Israel, the God of their people, of how mighty he is, how he will protect them, just as he has for generations and generations, of how he liberated them from Egypt and is bringing them through the promised land. And they've been raised through the 40 years in the wilderness, seeing how God has sustained them, miraculously providing food for them and safety and protection whenever they've needed it. So they know that God is with them, and they can walk with a certain confidence around them. But on the other hand, we have this woman called Rahab. She's not one of the people of Israel. She's not seen the blessings of God firsthand or the journey that the people have been through. She hasn't seen God's provision in these times. What she and others throughout the land of Canaan have heard are the stories of the people of Israel and the God that they serve. They've heard of how plagues have ridden Egypt up until Pharaoh had let them go. And then even when they pursued them, they hear the stories of how God seemingly did the impossible things, opening the Red Sea before them so that they could escape. These were stories of crushing defeats of those who stood against them, and how mighty nations have fallen and been totally destroyed at the hands of the Israelites. So whilst for these spies coming into the land, they hear these stories, and it's ones of celebration, it's one of divine deliverance. It's meant to encourage and inspire. To those outside of Israel and to Rahab, these are stories that are supposed to bring fear, strike fear into the hearts of their enemies and discourage them. Being the big comic book nerd that I am, this reminds me a bit of the bat signal. You know, when Gotham PD wants to get in contact with Batman, Commissioner Gordon, he would fire up the bat signal, shines a big light in the sky with the silhouette of a bat, very good branding for Batman. But it also served as another purpose. When the civilians or the victims in the city, when they would see this light, they would look up and it would give them hope that a hero is coming to save them. It's making the city safer. But for the criminals in the city, when they see this, it will strike fear into their hearts because it serves as a warning that justice is out there, that vengeance is on his way to come and stop them. But for Rahab, it's in hearing these stories and hearing the stories of the God of Israel that she could see something that many others were not able to. And it's just as it says in verse 9, where she says, "I know that the Lord has given you this land." Here, Rahab is hearing the story of the Israelites, and she's able to see that the God of Israel is the God of heaven and earth. And whilst there is a healthy level of fear that rises up in her, more importantly, we see an even greater amount of faith and boldness. And she knows for certain that the Lord is going to give the land to the Israelites. And this is a stark contrast to the 10 spies that we spoke about at the very beginning. These spies were men of God's chosen people. People who would know God's faithfulness and promises better than anyone. They've experienced it firsthand. But it was an outsider, a prostitute no less, it says, who was able to see something that these men were not able to see. And she was able to have faith to know that God would come through just as he said he would, even when these men couldn't. I think it can so often be misunderstood that God will use only really good people, or the ones that hear from God, and the ones who see what God's doing are the really holy people. You know, they might spend 8 hours in the Bible a day praying and reading it, and it's only then will they hear from God. But what the Bible shows us is that time and time again, it's often the unlikeliest of people, the ones who don't seem qualified enough, the ones whose society would be quick to reject. They're able to see what God is doing, and they're often the first ones to get on board. We see it here in Joshua 2, and we see it in the New Testament. When Jesus came as God on earth, the Pharisees and the other religious leaders at the time, the ones who would study the words of God and teach and lead the people in their worship, they weren't able to realize Jesus as the Messiah standing before them. That the Son of God who came to take the sins of the world was there. In John 1:11, it says, "He came to which was his own, but his own did not receive him." It was the outcasts in society, those with low social standings, the sick, the poor. They were the ones that would recognize Jesus as the Messiah and choose to follow him. In fact, the first person in John's gospel to recognize Jesus as the Messiah was a Samaritan woman, someone from a nation that were sworn enemies of the Jewish people. And we see the disciples that he chose, they were fishermen. They weren't the religious leaders. They weren't the elite few. They were just simple fishermen that came to follow Jesus. And you might have come here today feeling like the worst sinner in the world, or someone who maybe couldn't be further away from God, or simply not as close as you once were. But please hear this. Our imperfection doesn't disqualify us from a relationship with God. It's our faith and our belief in Jesus that invites us into a relationship with him, helps align us, and brings us closer to God. And if at the moment all you can muster up is just the tiniest bit of faith, that's okay. Matthew 17, Jesus tells us all we need is faith as small as a mustard seed. And those seeds are really tiny. But Jesus meets us where we're at, in our hurt, in our pain, in our pride. And as we give him the little we have, he continues to show up faithfully time and time again. And over time, our faith can continue to grow in him as we trust him that little bit more. But another important piece of information that we find out about Rahab is that she ain't no snitch. When the king finds out that the spies had been to her house and they send the messengers, she could have easily given them up. You know, I mean, she's a Canaanite woman. She's not one of the people of Israel, so she's got no stake in it. And on the surface, these men, turning in these men could have put her in a very favorable position. Plus, if the spies don't make it back because they've been killed, then the Israelites might not invade. So, she might want to boost her social standing just a bit. But if the king's men did decide to just search her house anyway, then they would have been found, and she definitely would have been killed for treason. So what good would come from hiding these men? Why doesn't she just turn them in? But Rahab knows that this would only bring a short-term, immediate comfort. The faith that Rahab had, it required her to step out and stand firm on it and trust that God will deliver her and keep her safe from harm. There is a boldness in Rahab's faith, something that we can learn a lot from. But the truth is, there can be an uncomfortableness about taking a step of faith. The thoughts that can creep in of how will society view me, or what will my friends and my family think of me if I make this stand in my faith? Will they be able to see if I'm wrong, and will it make me look like a fool? Yeah, as Alex mentioned, I'm training to one day go and run a church. And before coming here to Penny Lane, I was in Bristol at Bible College. And because of this and the future job that I'm going into, every time I was in a family setting with my cousins, there would almost come this grilling of questions about God and the Bible and some questions of the Christian faith. And some of my cousins are definitely not Christian, so they would love to kind of bring all these difficult questions and be like, yeah, but what about this? And the thing is, when I'm around my cousins, there came this time where their lifestyle, one, is very different from mine. We enjoy different recreational activities. But every time I was in those settings, I would still want to be able to fit in with my cousins. I didn't want to be the one that kind of was sticking out or was different from everyone. So when this question time inevitably came, I'd want to downplay my faith almost. Not to reject it, but almost just to say enough to appease them and kind of quickly try and divert to something else. I'd rather try and fit into the culture that was set around my cousins, and rather than to stand confidently and represent God. I've really been challenged on this, and because I believe in a God that transforms lives. That this God offers us a life that is far greater than anything that this world has to offer. He is a God who brings life where there was once death, hope where all we can see is despair. And of course, I want this for my cousins too. I want them to know that they are loved by him, that he came to save them and to give them a life that is everlasting. So I had to make a choice, and A choice to no longer hide behind the culture or the lens that society holds up as normal or acceptable, and to stand firm in my faith. To boldly reveal the love and the truth of Jesus, regardless of how I look to them. I just want them to see Jesus so that their lives can be transformed too. You know, Rahab's case of boldness here was something that was quite dramatic, you know, giving a false report to a king so that the spies' lives may be saved. And I'm sure not many of us ourselves will find ourselves in that exact same scenario. So what does this boldness look like for us today? Maybe it's something small, you know, it's taking a stand to not gossip in the office along with our colleagues, but instead to show the love of Jesus. Maybe it's being bold to invite someone, a friend, along to Alpha or to the new 9 a.m. service. To not hide our faith behind it, but to make a stand. Or perhaps that step of faith is a little bit bigger. Maybe it's taking a stand against injustice, being a voice that speaks out when people are treated unfairly, whether that be systematically, or on a local level. Woke up Bixby. But maybe God is speaking to you about a career move or a house move. Now, I'm not saying anyone should just go and leave their job and become a lion tamer or something. Unless God's telling you to do that, then by all means. But what's important here is that we don't want to ignore what God is trying to lead us into. We want to take some time to pray into that, listen to the voice of God, see where he's going. And we're going to have a team down here when we come to prayer ministry, and we would love to pray with you on that stuff. You know, you don't have to tell them the details, but we'll just stand with you in prayer and lift it up to God. But at times, it can be really scary to take a step of faith, especially when we can't see the way ahead. For Rahab to make that stand, she didn't know whether the king was going to come down herself, find them, and they'd be destroyed. But she had to take a step of faith in what she believed, that God was going to move powerfully, then give this land, and that if she does what she does, then he is going to save her. It can be very scary when we don't see the end goal ahead. But all we have to do is to fix our eyes on Jesus, to have faith that he is going to bring us through. We can often find ways to make excuses. You know, I don't want to be that Christian guy at work who's always talking about my faith. Maybe this is for something else. But taking a step of faith, sometimes it's a risk. But we trust and know and believe that God is good, that God loves us. He wants to bring us into life.